guys, okay, we are on our last act of Hamlet. We are at Act 5. This particular act has two scenes, Scene 1 and Scene 2. This scene begins in a churchyard, in a graveyard, and we have two grave diggers. In other versions, they're called the clowns. In this particular version, they're called the clowns. I was raised on grave digger, so I may say grave digger, but don't be confused. So it depends on the version, however they set up the text. So, picture it. You're in a cemetery, an old English cemetery, and some dude's just digging away in the ground. And the two clowns are having a discussion. And the first one says, is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? When he says willfully seeks her own salvation, that means that she willfully killed herself. And the second clown goes, I tell thee she is, and therefore make her grave straight. The crowner hath sat on her, and finds it Christian burial. This crowner hath sat on her, that's a coroner. A crowner is a coroner. And the coroner has said, yes, it was an accident. It was not a suicide. And the first clown goes, how can that be? Unless she drowned herself in her own defense. And the second clown's like, look, this is what was found. Watch as found so. But the first clown is not having it. He continues, it must be se offendendo, which is Latin, and it actually, instead of self-defense, it means self-offense, as if she did it. And he says it cannot be else, for here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, if I drown myself on purpose, it argues an act. And that act has three branches. You have to act, you have to do, and then you have to perform. Our gal, she drowned herself wittingly. And the second clown goes, no, nay, but hear you, good man Delver. And the first clown's like, no, give me leave. Here lies the water. And he says, and here stands the man. If the man goes to this water and drowns himself, it is willy-nilly he goes. It's just the way it is. And this is where we get the phrase willy-nilly. Mark you that. But if the water comes to him and drowns him, he drowns not himself. Argyle, he that is not guilty of his own death, shortens not his own life. So the first clown is claiming, she can go to the water and willingly drown herself. However, the water cannot come to her on dry land and just drown her in a random act. So that's the point he's making here. And the clown goes, but is this law? And he says, aye, marry 'tis, crowner's quest law. So he's saying this law is false. However, there's nothing we can do because the coroner has set it thus. And then the second clown goes, will you hath the truth on't? If this had not been a gentlewoman, she would have been buried out of Christian burial. So now we're talking about the class system, because he says, had this woman not been of some rank, because, she's Polonius's daughter, and Polonius is the king's advisor, so she has a little bit of street cred. And so he's basically saying if she had been a common person, she would not have been given this Christian burial. She would have been deemed a suicide and buried in unhallowed ground. And the first clown says, why, thou sayest, and the more pity that great folk should have countenance in this world to drown or hang themselves more than they're even Christian. So he's like, too bad us common folk don't have the privilege to kill ourselves or do whatever and still be given Christian burial. We do not have that. It's only people of a certain rank who are allowed to be given these special rights. And he's just like, it's not fair. And he says, there is no ancient gentleman but gardeners, ditchers, and grave makers. They hold up Adam's profession. And when he says Adam's profession, he's talking about Adam and Eve, Adam. And the second clown goes, was he a gentleman? And he's referring to Adam. And the first clown, he says he was the first that ever bore arms. And then the second clown goes, why? He had none? As if he didn't have any arms, like arms? And the first clown, what he means is like weapons, like digging, implements, tools. But the second clown takes it as actual limbs. And he's like, what? Adam had no arms? And the clown goes, what? Art a heathen? So specifically, are you stupid? How dost thou understand the scripture? He said, the scripture says Adam digged. Could he dig without arms? A put another question to thee. If thou answerest me not to the purpose, confess thyself. And then the second clown says, go to. So at this point we realize that the clown / gravediggers, this is a bit of comedic, I would say dark comedic relief for the audience at this point, just something for them to think about, but it's also kind of silly because the second clown is so stupid, right? He's to be made fun of. So the second clown, he proposes a question. He says, hey, I've got a question for you, and I want you to answer me. And the second clown goes, go to, ask me. And the first clown says, what is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter? So who is the strongest builder? Who's stronger than a mason, a shipwright, and a carpenter? And the second clown goes, the gallows maker. And that's the people who make the structure that you hang people on. And he says, for that frame outlives 1,000 tenants. People being hung. And the first clown goes, ha ha, I like thy wit well, which I like your humor. And he says, in good faith, the gallows does well. But how does it well? It does well to those that do ill. Now, thou dost ill to say the gallows is built stronger than the church. The gallows may do well to thee, to't again come. So he's like, I see your point. I can see how a gallows maker would make a structure that would outlast 1,000 tenants, because that's where people die. He says, but what about the church? You can't say the church is not a strong structure. That's where our religion, that's where we worship. And he's like, so try again. To't again comes. Let's try again. And the second clown goes, who builds stronger than a mason, a shipwright, or a carpenter? And the first clown, I tell me that, and unyoke. And when he says, give me the answer, and then we can stop working for the day. Unyoke. And the second clown goes, marry now, I can tell. So he's like, oh, I know. And the first clown goes, to it, which means tell me. And then the second clown, mass is a mild swear, kind of like, I guess, damn. So he says, damn, I cannot tell. So he forgets the answer. And at that point, Hamlet and Horatio, we see them coming from a distance. But the clowns continue to discuss. And the clown's like, cudgel thy brains no more about it. So think no more about the answer. For your dull ass will not mend his pace with beating. So he's like, you're like a stupid donkey out in the field that even if you smack it with a stick, it won't go any further. He's like, that's the way your brain is. You're just stupid. And don't stress your brain out. You're never going to get the answer. And then he tells him the answer. He's like, and when you are asked this question next time, say grave maker. The houses he makes last till doomsday. And at this point, he's just going to dismiss the second clown. He's like, ugh, go, get thee to yawn. Fetch me a stoup of liquor. So evidently the first clown sends the second clown to go get him some booze at this point. So the second clown leaves, and the first clown continues to dig and sing. And he is digging out a plot to bury somebody in. And so he sings this little song, and Hamlet sees it, and he goes, has this fellow no feeling of his business, that he sings at grave making? So Hamlet's taken aback that this guy, this grave digger, he's digging a grave for somebody who has passed away, and this is a sad thing, but yet the grave digger's like, doodly-doo-doo-doo, bop-bop-bop. So he's just, not even thinking about it. And Horatio says, custom hath made it in him a property of easiness. So the fact that he does it every day, the fact that he's desensitized to the fact that a dead body is going to go in there, he's just doing his daily work. He's going about his daily tasks. And then Hamlet says, 'tis in so, the hand of little employments hath the daintier sense. Basically, he's saying those of us who work harder, who have the hard jobs, we can't afford to be sentimental. And it's just part of being a hard worker and having these tough jobs to do. And the first clown continues to sing. I will spare you singing. So he sings that bit, and then he tosses up a skull, because in England, because there was so little land at the time, they would bury people for a short period of time, let their bodies decompose, and then they would dig up the bones, and they would rebury somebody in the plot. So essentially what this grave digger is doing is he is digging up an old funeral plot, and he's going to bury somebody anew. We know who they're burying, but Hamlet and Horatio do not. So, the skull is tossed up, and Hamlet gets it. And he says, that skull had a tongue in it, and could sing once. How the knave jowls it to the ground, as if 'twere Cain's jawbone that did the first murder. So here again we have reference to that primal eldest curse. Remember, that's one thing that Claudius was lamenting when he was attempting to pray, trying to get down on his knees. So again, we have that reference to the primal eldest curse with Cain and Abel and all of that. And then he continues, and he says, that might be the pate of a politician, which this ass now o'erreaches, one that would circumvent God might it not. So he's just kind of pontificating on who this skull possibly could be. And Horatio's like, it might, my lord, be any of those people. And then Hamlet continues, or of a courtier we could say, good morrow, sweet lord, how dost thou, good lord? So he's like talking to it, and he said, this might be my lord, such a one, that praised my lord such a one's horse when he meant to beg it, might it not? So Hamlet's just playfully just sort of trying to imagine who this person may be. And Horatio's just going along, he's like, aye, my lord. And then Hamlet says, why, and so, and now my lady worms, chapless, and knocked about the mazzard with a sexton's spade. Here's fine resolution, as we had the trick to see it. Did these bones cost no more than breeding, but to play at loggets with them? Mine ache to think on it. So at this point, he's thinking about the fact that this individual who is now reduced to bone, were they, could they have ever imagined that this is where they would be knocked about in the head with a spade in the ground. And the first clown continues to sing, and he throws up another skull. And Hamlet goes, there's another. Why may not that be the skull of a lawyer? So now he thinks it could be a lawyer. He says, where be his quiddits now, his quillets? So quiddits and quillets, his arguments, his reproofs, his reproaches. He's like, his tenures, his tricks. Why does he suffer this rude knave now to knock him about the sconce with a dirty shovel, and will not tell him of his action of battery? I like that. He's like, so this lawyer's just getting hit in the head with a spade, and he can't even sue the guy for battery at this point, because he's dead. And he says, this fellow might be in times a great buyer of land, with his statutes, his recognizances, his fines, his double vouchers, his recoveries. Is this the fine of his fines, and the recoveries of his recoveries, to have his fine paid full of fine dirt? So he's like, what if this guy was a great buyer of land? And he thinks that the only land that the guy has possession of now is the land that's inside the skull, the bit of dirt that's in there. And so he thinks about that too, and I think that's really cool. So Hamlet's thinking about that. And then he says, the very conveyance of his lands will scarcely lie in this box. And he's talking about the actual coffin. And he says, and must the inheritor himself have no more. And then Horatio says, not a jot more, my lord. So he doesn't have a bit more land than that. And then Hamlet starts talking about the actual document, like a deed. He said, is not parchment made of sheepskin? And he says, I, my lord, and of calfskins too. And Hamlet, they are sheep and calves which seek out assurance in that I will speak to this fellow. And then he speaks to the grave digger, and he says, whose grave's this, sir? And the first clown, through the rest of this, the first grave digger clown, whatever, he's extremely literal. So when Hamlet says something to him, he takes it extremely literal. For example, he says, whose grave is this? And the clown says, it's mine. Because the clown's digging it, so he's like, well, it's my grave, I just dug it. And then Hamlet says, well, I think it be thine indeed, for thou liest in it. So he's like, yeah, it must be yours, you're in it. And the clown goes, but you lie out of it, sir, and therefore 'tis not yours. For my part, I do not lie in it, yet it is mine. Now, here we're going to have lie two different ways. Lie as in I'm not telling you the truth, as well as lie like I am lying in the grave. So he's going to mess with that. The grave digger's going to mess with those two meanings. And Hamlet says, thou dost lie in it, to be in it, and say it is thine. So you're lying in it, so it must be yours. 'Tis for the dead, not for the quick, therefore thou liest. He says, however, a grave is for a dead person, not a living. That's the quick. Quick means living. He says, therefore, you are a liar. You are not telling the truth because graves are for dead people and you're alive. So that's what that bit is. And the clown says, 'tis a quick lie, sir. 'Twill away again from me to you. So he's like, it's a quick lie because soon enough I'll be in here. So just wait. Give it a couple of years and it will literally be my grave. And then Hamlet goes, what man dost thou dig it for? And the clown goes, for no man, sir. And he says, what woman then? And he says, for none neither. And then Hamlet's just frustrated. He's like, well then, who's to be buried in it? And the clown says, one that was a woman, sir. But rest her soul, she's dead. So now that she's dead, to the gravedigger, she's neither man nor woman. She's a dead body. So, Hamlet says how absolute the knave is, which means how literal this gravedigger is. He is so literal. And he says, we must speak by the card or equivocation will undo it. So we must speak very carefully and tell him exactly what we need, or he will frustrate us to no end. And he says, by the Lord Horatio, these 3 years I have taken note of it. The age is grown so picked that the toe of the peasant comes so near the heel of the courtier, he gals his kibe. How long hast thou been a grave maker? And then the clown says, of all the days in the year, I came to't the day that our last King Hamlet overcame Fortinbras. So we have mention of that subplot that we keep coming back. So he's talking about Fortinbras and the battle between King Hamlet. And Hamlet's like, well, how long is that since? And the clown says, cannot you tell that? Every fool can tell that. It was the very day that young Hamlet was born, he that is mad and sent into England. So at this point we realize that the first clown, the gravedigger, does not recognize Prince Hamlet. He doesn't know who he is. And this again is another commentary on status, that this gravedigger, the only thing he's worried about is doing his job, making his money, and going home and feeding his family. He doesn't care about royalty. He doesn't care about rank. These things do not put food on his table. So Hamlet, he doesn't know who Hamlet is. But Hamlet's going to take advantage of this because he's going to try to get some information. And so he says, "Aye, Mary, why was he sent into England?" And this is a good gauge on what the population of Denmark are saying about the whole situation, about Hamlet being taken away to England. And the clown says, "Why? Because he was mad, and he shall recover his wits there. Or if he do not, it's no great matter." And Hamlet's like, "Why?" And he says, "'Twill not he seen in him there. There the men are mad as he." So he's like, well, nobody will notice. Well, first he says, if Hamlet's mad, he can recover in England. And if he doesn't recover, well, nobody's going to notice because all English people are crazy. So that's what he's saying. And Hamlet goes, "How came he mad?" So how did he become mad? He says, "Very strangely, they say." And Hamlet goes, "How strangely?" And the clown says, "Faith in with losing his wits." And Hamlet goes, "Upon what ground?" And of course, Hamlet's trying to say, what are the people saying? Why did he go mad? Was it love sickness? Was it the death of his father? Was it the hasty marriage of his mother? And he says, upon what ground? What are the grounds of him? And the clown, again, is very literal, and he says, upon what ground? Well, here in Denmark, on Denmark's ground. He says, "I've been sexton here, man and boy, 30 years. But he finally gets the answer that the gravedigger has been at his job for 30 years. And then Hamlet asks him, how long will a man lie in the earth ere he rot? Because, the gravedigger's popping out skeletons. So Hamlet's asking him, how long do you let a body decompose in the earth before you go digging him up and burying a new body in? And the first clown says, "Faith, if he be not rotten before he die, as we may have many poxy courses." Now, poxy course is an individual who has died from the plague, pox upon you. And he's saying that people who died from the Black Plague, that their bodies are pretty deteriorated already. So he says it depends on how they die. And he says he will last you some 8 or 9 years, but a tanner will last you 9. And Hamlet goes, "Why he more than another?" And he says, why, sir, his hide is so tanned with his trade that he will keep water out a great while. And your water is a sore decayer of your whoreson dead body. Here's a skull now. This skull hath lain in the earth 23 years. So we're looking at about 7 to 8 years that they let a body die or lay in the ground and rot before they dig it up. But then the clown has said that a tanner, somebody who, cures hides, animal skins, their body takes longer because of the chemicals. Which, TMI for me because that sketches me out. But it's interesting. So he pulls one particular skull out and he says this guy has been in the ground for 23 years. And Hamlet goes, well, whose was it? And the clown says, a whoreson mad fellow's it was. Whose do you think it was? And Hamlet's like, I don't know whose it is. And then the clown goes, a pestilence on him for a mad rogue. So evidently this clown does not like this person that he has just dug out because he just called him a mad rogue. And he said, poured a flagon of Rhenish on my head once. So evidently this dude poured wine on his head. And he said, this same skull, sir, was Yorick's skull, the king's gesture. And now Hamlet becomes very interested. And he's like, this? And the clown goes, Ein, that. And Hamlet's like, let me see. And he takes the skull. And he says, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now how abhorred in my imagination it is. So evidently when Hamlet was a young child, Yorick was their court gesture. And when he says that he bore me on the back, that meant he would give him piggyback rides. And that he continues, he says, here hung those lips that I've kissed, I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? So he's looking at him, he's like, where are your jokes now, Yorick? He says, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment were wont to set the table on a roar, not one now to mock your own grinning. And he looks at him, he's like, well, you're not here to make fun of this fact that you're just a skull now. He says, now, he goes, quite chapfallen, which is funny because when he says quite chapfallen, that means the bottom half of the jaw is either missing or that it's agape. And so he's like, quite chapfallen. And he says, now get you to my lady's chambers and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. To this favor she must come, make her laugh at that. Prithee, Horatio, tell me one thing. So at the end here, he tells the jester to go to his mom's court, tell her she wears too much makeup. She looks like a clown. Make a joke out of it. And then he turns his attention to Horatio and he says, tell me one more thing. And Horatio goes, what's that, my lord? And he's like, dost thou think Alexander looked o' this fashion in the earth? So now he's thinking about Alexander the Great. And he's looking at Yorick, and he's wondering if the two skulls appeared the same. If one were to pull Yorick, just a lowly court jester, and then pull out Alexander the Great, who was a mighty king, could you tell the difference betwixt the two? And just that you couldn't. And that, again, is a comment on class structure and how we're really all equal in the end. And so Horatio says, I'm so. And then Hamlet goes, ugh, and smelt so, pah. And then he throws down the skull. And Horatio's like, I'm so, my lord. So he's agreeing with him. And Hamlet goes, what base uses we may return, Horatio? Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunk hole? So basically, it's like a vat of beer. So the fact that we deteriorate, we go back into the earth, and then the earth just, we become trees, or we become, bits of, I don't know. So it's just the whole idea, the whole circle of life idea. And Horatio continues, 'twere to consider too curiously to consider so. And Hamlet continues, no faith, not a jot, but to follow him thither with modesty enough and likelihood to lead it, as thus. Alexander died, Alexander was buried, and Alexander returneth into dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make loam, and why of that loam whereto he was converted might they not stop a beer barrel? And Imperious Caesar dead and turned to clay. So he goes from Alexander the Great to Julius Caesar. We've had a lot of references back to Julius Caesar. Might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that the earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter's flaw. But soft, decide, here comes the king. So from a distance, Hamlet, during his pontification of death and equality of all humans, he sees a funeral procession coming, and he has no idea who this funeral is for. We do, and we're sad, so he notices it, and we see priests, Laertes, king, queen, and Hamlet goes, the queen, the courtiers, who is that they follow? And with such maimed rites. And when he says maimed rites, we know that the priest is like just halfway doing these rites. He's just like, he's doing a sloppy jog. They're not proper at all. And he goes, this doth betoken the course they followed did with desperate hand fordo its own life. So again, we know that course is corpse. So Hamlet gathers from the maimed rites, the kind of, the garbage job that this priest is doing, that this individual must have taken their own life, with desperate hand fordo its own life. But, he says, 'twas of some estate, which means they had some money and rank. And he says, couch we a while and mark. So he's like, let's sit back and watch. And so he retires with Horatio. And Laertes is mad. Like, he is pissed. And he's like, what ceremony else? He looks at the priest and he's like, what other parts of this ceremony are you going to do? And Hamlet points out, that is Laertes, a very noble youth, Mark. And Laertes is talking to the priest. He's like, what ceremony else? And the priest is like, hey, her obsequies have been as far enlarged as we have warranties. Her death was doubtful. So he's like, simmer down, Laertes. You know that this case is suspicious. And he says, and but that great command or sways the order she should in ground unsanctified have lodged till the last trumpet for charitable prayers, shards, flints, and pebbles should be thrown on her. So he's like, you know what? Instead of this grand sanctification of her body, she actually deserves for rocks to be thrown at her. But here we are, allowing her virgin rites. He says her maid instruments and the bringing home of bell and burial. So the priest is not shy with telling Laertes that he knows that she doesn't deserve this, but Laertes needs to hold his tongue because she's getting more than she deserves. And Laertes is not having it. He's like, must there no more be done? Is there nothing else more that we can do? And the priest is like, no, more be done. We should profane the service of the dead to sing a requiem and such rest to her as the peace-parted souls. So at this part, he's like, no, nothing else can be done. And he said, and we would profane. We would, what's a good word? We would defame the dead that are already present in this cemetery if we were to sing her the rites that they received and they deserved. They would be in an uproar, and we're not going to do this. And Laertes is like, lay her in the earth, and from her fair and unpolluted flesh may violet spring. So Laertes is making the point that she's a virgin, she deserves these rites, and the priest is going to see how pure and amazing she was when the violets spring. And he goes, I tell thee, churlish priest, which is a name you shouldn't call a priest. And he says, ministering angel shall my sister be when thou liest howling. So this last bit, he tells her that his sister will be an angel in heaven when he lies howling in hell. Laertes is not having it. And then Hamlet realizes who it is. And he's like, oh God, what? The fair Ophelia? And the queen has flowers and she's scattering and she sweets to the sweet farewell. And then she says something here that has always bothered me, because she says, I hoped thou shouldst have been my Hamlet's wife. I thought thy bride bed tub decked, sweet maid, and not have strown their grave. Now, Hamlet could not have married Ophelia because she was out of his station. So at this point, like, I'm already not real happy with Gertrude, but I don't like that line. It's always bothered me. So, Laertes is just beside himself. And he's like, oh, trouble, woe, fall 10 times, trouble on that cursed head. whose wicked deed thy most ingenious sense deprived thee of. So he's like, I hope 10 times troubles, times 10 fall upon the individual who made you lose your sanity, Ophelia. And he says, hold off the earth a while. And when he says that, he means the gravedigger. The gravedigger's evidently shoveling dirt on her while the people are standing around. And he's like, hold off thy dirt till I have caught her once more in mine arms. And at this point, Laertes jumps into the grave. And he's ready to get Ophelia out of the coffin and snuggle. And he goes, now pile your dust upon the quick and dead. So he's like, pile it on the living and the dead, till of this flat a mountain you have made, to o'ertop old Pelion or the skyish head of blue Olympus. So he's like, jumps in, he grabs her, he's like, do it, cover us both. I no longer want to live. Bury me with her. So he's having a moment. And then Hamlet, God bless Hamlet, Hamlet's like, I'm not having any of this. So he starts approaching, and he's like, what is he whose grief bears such an emphasis? He's like, what? Why are you acting so sad, Laertes? He goes, whose phrase of sorrow conjures the wandering stars and makes them stand like wonder-wounded hearers? This is I, Hamlet the Dane. And this is such a weird time for Hamlet to pull rank. But he leaps into the grave. He will not be outdone by Laertes, and we have learned that he's slightly jealous of Laertes. So he's like, oh, Laertes is going to mourn. Watch this. I'm going to mourn harder. So he jumps in the grave. And Laertes is like, what? The devil take thy soul. And then they start to wrestle. They're wrestling, right? And so they're like, oh, no, I'm sadder. No, I'm sadder. And then Hamlet's like, thou prayest not well. I prithee take thy fingers from my throat. Laertes got him by the throat. He's like, for though I'm not splendid and rash, yet have I in me something dangerous, which let the wiseness fear. Away thy hand. And the king tries to get involved, and he's like, pluck them asunder, pull them apart. And the queen's like, Hamlet, Hamlet. And then everybody's like, gentlemen, gentlemen. And Horatio's like, good Lord, be quiet. Shh, calm down, you know. And then these attendants, like, they pull them apart, and then everybody gets out of the grave. And Hamlet's like, why, I will fight with him upon this theme until my eyelids will no longer wag. And the queen's like, oh, my son, what thing? What have you done? What is the meaning of this? And Hamlet goes, I loved Ophelia. 40,000 brothers could not, with all their quantity of love, make up my sum. So he's like, Laertes, her brother, loves her, but hey, 40,000 brothers couldn't love Ophelia as much as I love her. So he's trying to outside Laertes. And so he says, what wilt thou do for her? And the king's like, oh, he is mad, Laertes. And the queen's like, for the love of God, forbear him. And Hamlet's like, swoons, show me what thou'll do. Would weep, would fight, would fast, would tear thyself, would drink up Isel, eat a crocodile, I'll do it. So he's like saying, what do I have to do to show I'm the saddest? Do you want me to weep? You want me to get in another fight? You want me to starve myself? You want me to hurt myself? You want me to drink Isel as like vinegar? And then he says, you want me to eat a crocodile? I'll do it. Then you'll know how sad I am. And then he goes, dost thou come here to whine? To outface me with leaping in her grave? Be buried quick with her, and so will I. He's like, I'll do it too. You can be buried alive. I'll be buried alive. Laertes, watch. Says, and if thou prate of mountains, let them throw millions of acres on us, till our ground, singeing his pate against the burning zone, make also like a wart. Nay, thou'lt mouth, I'll rant as well as thou. And the queen's just over it. She's like, oh God, this is mere madness. And that's a while the fit will work on him. And she's like, and he will be mad for a bit longer. However, she says, he will become like a patient female dove. When that her golden couplets are disclosed, his silence will sit drooping. So she's like, he gets fired up, but then like a dove, he'll take a minute, he'll chill out, he'll see that his nest's good, he'll get on his little eggs, and he'll be like, all right, I'm good. We'll just chill for a while. So that's what the queen says. I think it's weird, but hey, we're in Elizabethan England, so let's just let it happen. And Hamlet's like, oh, hear you, sir. What is the reason that you use me thus? I loved you ever, but it is no matter. And he's talking to Laertes. So he's like, Laertes, why are you doing this to me? Why are you trying to make everybody think that you're sadder than me? And he's like, I love you, dude. I thought we were bros. He's like, ugh, but it is no matter. Let Hercules himself do what he may. The cat will meow and the dog will have his day. So he's like, the dog's gonna hunt. So I guess I'll just back away. And so he leaves. And then the king's like, I pray thee, good Horatio, wait upon him. So basically the king's like, Horatio, follow him, watch him. He is not straight. He's not good. He is messed up. He's out there. He's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So you watch him. So then the king addresses Laertes and he's like, strengthen your patience, which means calm down. He's like, remain calm and just remember last night's speech. I know you want to kill him right now, but just be patient and remember what we've decided to do. He says, we'll put the matter to the present push. Good Gertrude, set some watch over your son. This grave shall have a living monument. So he's like, Gertrude, wifey, go watch your son. But then he assures her again that Ophelia's grave will have a huge monument. An hour of quiet shortly shall we see. Till then in patience our proceeding be. So he's like, she's going to have a proper burial. We're going to get her a huge monument. I know we kind of just ruined the funeral, but we will rectify this sitch. And Gertrude's like, okay. So, and then everybody exits. And that is the end of Act 5, Scene 1. And we'll pick up with Act 5, Scene 2 later. Alright guys, see ya!